You picture a dark, flickering timber tavern along the River Thames, heavy oak tables sloshing with dark ale, laughter echoing off rough plaster walls, red paint gleaming on the front door while sailors and foreign merchants throw silver coins onto the counter. You imagine running an outlaw business in a lawless medieval underworld, answerable to no one except the muscle you hire at the door. In spring of 1391, the legal maximum rent you could charge a woman for a room in Bankside was capped at exactly 14 pence a week. That equaled less than 3 days of wages for an average London carpenter. Yet that same year, the estate accounting ledgers recorded hundreds of marks pouring out of that exact single riverbank street. The money wasn't being collected by a criminal syndicate. It was being audited, recorded, and deposited by the accountants of the Bishop of Winchester. If you operated a stewhouse in medieval Southwark, you weren't an outlaw running an illicit hideout. You were a heavily audited tenant in a state-sanctioned corporate park. By the end of this video, we will walk through the exact financial ledger, examine what it costs to open those painted doors, unpack how the Catholic Church systematically extracted its cut, and reveal why the richest mayor in London history used medieval prostitution to finance the King of England. To understand how a holy bishop became the undisputed kingpin of London's red light district, you have to look at a map from 1350. Inside the stone walls of the City of London, vice was strictly illegal. Royal proclamations commanded city wardens to sweep common prostitutes out of the gates. Anyone caught harboring them faced 40 days in pillory or prison. So the trade moved across the water. Directly south of London Bridge lay the township of Southwark. It sat outside the legal jurisdiction of the Lord Mayor of London. More importantly, a massive swath of this riverbank belonged to a special legal territory called the Liberty of the Clink. This land was held directly by the Bishop of Winchester. Inside the Liberty, royal officers had zero authority. London constables couldn't arrest anyone. The king's judges couldn't hold court. The only authority that mattered was the bishop's manor court. The church didn't look at Southwark and see a moral crisis. The church saw a legal spatial monopoly. High-ranking medieval theologians like Thomas Aquinas explicitly justified this layout. Aquinas famously wrote that suppressing prostitution would fill society with unpredictable lust, comparing sex work to a sewer in a grand palace. Take away the sewer and the palace becomes unlivable. The Bishop of Winchester simply decided that if the palace needed a sewer, he was going to charge rent on every single inch of the pipe. We know exactly how this system functions because of one extraordinary set of surviving documents. They are the Winchester Pipe Rolls. These massive parchment ledgers record every single penny collected across the bishop's estates year after year. They detail agricultural harvests, timber sales, court fines, and property rents. When you unroll the pipe rolls for the manor of Southwark, the accounting language changes instantly. You stop reading about sheep shearing and start reading about the stews. The word stew originally meant a hot vapor bathhouse. Bathhouses were imported from the Mediterranean during the Crusades, but by the 14th century, the baths were merely a cover story. The stews along Bankside were purpose-built brothels. The Winchester Pipe Rolls treat these stewhouses with the cold, detached precision of a modern real estate investment trust. Every Michaelmas, the bishop's estate steward arrived in Southwark. He opened his ledgers. He recorded the annual ground rent for 18 legally licensed stewhouses lining the river. Houses with names like the Rose, the Castle, the Bell, and the Cardinal's Hat. The church wasn't operating these houses directly. That would be a breach of canon law. Instead, the bishop leased the physical timber buildings to middle-tier operators known as stewholders. The stewholder paid a steep annual lease to the bishop for the right to operate the building. Then, the stewholder turned around and rented rooms to the women who worked there. It was a multi-tiered landlord model. The risk sat at the bottom. The profit flowed straight to the top. To keep this cash machine running without provoking a royal crackdown, the bishop published a strict code of legal regulations. These were the Ordinances of the Stews. The ordinances weren't designed to protect public morality. They were designed to maintain operational stability and prevent tenant uprisings. Rule number 1. No stewholder could force a woman to stay against her will. Rule number 2. No stewholder could sell bread, ale, or firewood inside the house at inflated prices to keep workers trapped in a cycle of debt. Rule number 3. Mandatory health inspections. Any woman showing signs of venereal disease, known colloquially as the burning, had to be immediately removed from the house. If a stewholder broke any of these rules, the bishop's bailiff didn't shut the house down, he issued a fine. Break the rule on forced debt? Pay 20 shillings to the bishop. That fine represented 40 days of labor for a skilled carpenter. Keep the front door open on a holy Sunday? Pay another 20 shillings. Harbor a known felon fleeing London constables? Pay 40 shillings. The fine system was brilliant. A violation wasn't a failure of the legal system. It was a secondary revenue line for the episcopal treasury. Look at the mechanics of room rent under the 1391 Ordinances. The bishop legally capped room rent at 14 pence per week per worker. In 14th century currency, 14 pence was roughly 3 days of wages for a skilled carpenter. On the surface, this looks like a generous price ceiling. It looks like the church protecting vulnerable workers from predatory brothel managers. It wasn't. By capping room rent, the church ensured that stewholders couldn't capture all the excess margin generated on Bankside. If a stewholder couldn't raise room rent, how did they make money? They sold high-margin extras. They charged exorbitant fees for clean linen, hot bath water, candles, and meals served off-premises. And whenever a stewholder tried to bypass the rent cap by charging hidden fees, the bishop's bailiff swept in, documented the infraction in the Winchester Pipe Rolls, and extracted a massive fine. The church had engineered a system where the stewholder took all the market risk, faced all the violent disruption, and paid for every operational failure, while the church extracted guaranteed ground rents and variable fine revenue. Before we examine the complete itemized profit and loss sheet for a medieval stewhouse, we need to address the historical record directly. No complete, itemized daily business ledger written by an individual 14th century stewholder has survived to the present day. Brothel managers in 1390 did not leave neatly organized accounting books for historians to discover. The figures in the model that follows represent an historical reconstruction. This model combines documented rental caps from the 1391 Ordinances of the Stews, official court fines recorded in the Winchester Pipe Rolls, contemporary victualling prices from the London Liber Albus, and standard wage figures for 14th century English tradesmen. Here is what it actually costs to operate a single licensed stewhouse along Bankside over the course of one full calendar year, modeled across 3 distinct economic environments. Let's start with a good year. In a good year, London Bridge is packed with travelers. Foreign merchants from Flanders and Italy are docking at the river wharves. Weather is mild, and the city is free of pestilence. Your stewhouse operates 4 rented rooms at full capacity, running 300 operational days after subtracting mandatory religious holidays. Revenue line items. Room rents, 4 rooms at the capped rate of 14 pence per week, generates approximately £12 per year. Service and victualling markups. Firewood, clean bed linen, hot water baths, and off-site food arrangements yield an additional £35 per year. Customer convenience fees, direct charges for security, candle lighting, and late-night access bring in another £13 per year. Gross revenue for a good year is £60. Now we subtract the unavoidable costs. Cost line items. Episcopal lease. The baseline annual ground lease paid directly to the Bishop of Winchester comes to £18. Bailiff's fines and compliance fees. Routine fines for minor Sunday violations or minor paperwork errors total £4. Maintenance and repairs. Replacing water-rotted timber, repairing riverfront pilings, and washing bedding costs £6. Physical security. Hiring 2 heavy doorkeepers to handle rowdy patrons costs £8. Fuel and consumables. Wood for water boilers, tallow candles, and laundry soap total £7. Subtotal operating expenses, £43. Before calculating net profit, we must subtract a fair market value for the owner's own unpaid physical labor. Managing 4 rooms, handling violent patrons, and purchasing supplies 14 hours a day requires at least 1 full-time owner-operator. Valuation of owner labor, £5 per year. Net profit for a good year, £12. Converted into our labor metric, £12 represents approximately 576 days of labor for a skilled London carpenter, roughly 2 full years of hard manual trade earned in 12 months. That sounds like a gold mine. It wasn't, because a good year was an exception. Now look at an average year. The weather is damp, trade in the City of London slows down, river traffic drops. The house operates at roughly 60 to 70% room occupancy across the year. Revenue line items. Room rents, £8. Service and victualling markups, £22. Customer convenience fees, £7. Gross revenue for an average year, £37. Cost line items. Episcopal lease. The bishop's rent does not change when your business slows down. It remains fixed at £18. Bailiff fines and compliance fees, £3. Maintenance and repairs. Firewood and timber rot don't stop because rooms are empty, £5. Security, £6. Fuel and basic consumables, £4. Subtotal operating expenses, £36. Subtracting owner labor valuation of £5, net profit for an average year, -£4. An average year produces an operational loss equivalent to 192 days of a carpenter's wages, nearly 4 years of income wiped out in 12 months. And if a stewholder defaulted on their lease to the bishop, they didn't get a bankruptcy hearing. They were arrested by the bishop's officers and dragged straight into the Clink prison, a dark, damp stone dungeon built right next door to the stewhouses. The system was an absolute vice. The bishop owned the land, owned the prison, wrote the local laws, and collected the rent. This financial structure created an intense domino effect that broke out across Bankside in the late 1400s. Because local English stewholders struggled under fixed episcopal leases, they began selling off their operational subleases to foreign operators, specifically immigrants from Flanders and Brabant. These foreign women, contemptuously called bawds of Flanders in English court records, were willing to work under tighter margins. They brought in foreign labor, streamlined costs, and aggressively cut out local middlemen. By the 1370s, almost the entire operational site of Bankside was controlled by Flemish immigrants, but the ultimate landlords remained elite English political figures leasing land directly from the church. Local Londoners hated this setup. They saw foreign operators making money on English soil while elite English landlords used the church's legal immunity to avoid paying city taxes. Pressure built for decades. In June 1381, the dam broke. The Peasants Revolt, led by Wat Tyler, marched on London. The rebels weren't just angry about poll taxes. They were furious at institutional corruption, church wealth, and elite monopolies. When the rebel army reached the south bank of the Thames, they didn't march straight across London Bridge into the city. They stopped in Southwark. They marched straight down Bankside to the stewhouses. They targeted houses leased to Flemish managers and owned by wealthy London elites. The rebels stormed the timber buildings, dragged out the furniture, and burned the brothels to the mud. They didn't burn them because they were against vice. They burned them because the stewhouses were the most visible symbol of state-sanctioned financial extraction on the river. Which brings us to the ultimate question. If running a brothel was a low-margin, high-risk operational trap, who actually got rich from Bankside? The answer isn't found in the brothel keepers. It's found in a man named Sir William Walworth. William Walworth was not a pimp. He was the Lord Mayor of London, a master fishmonger, and one of the wealthiest financiers in English history. Walworth understood the ultimate secret of medieval vice economics. Never manage the business, own the underlying master lease. According to surviving municipal records and parliamentary petitions, Walworth acquired long-term master leases on several Bankside stewhouses directly from the Bishop of Winchester. One of his premier holdings was the Rose, the exact same brothel burned by Wat Tyler's rebels in 1381. Walworth didn't stand at the door of the Rose collecting pennies from patrons. He sublet the physical building to Flemish operators at a massive premium. He took the steady, guaranteed cash flow from those subleases and used it as collateral to dominate the London fish market. Then he used his fish monopoly to generate liquid gold reserves. When King Richard II ran out of money to fight the 100 Years' War, he didn't go to an Italian bank. He went to Sir William Walworth. Walworth personally loaned thousands of pounds directly to the English crown, securing his loans against future tax revenues. When Wat Tyler led the Peasants Revolt into London in 1381, meeting young King Richard II at Smithfield, it was Sir William Walworth who drew his short sword and personally struck Wat Tyler down on the spot. Historians often present Walworth's action as a grand gesture of royal loyalty. Look closer at the ledger. Wat Tyler's rebels had just burned down Walworth's lucrative stewhouses in Southwark days earlier. Walworth wasn't just defending his king, he was protecting the ultimate financial system that made him rich. Walworth used vice cash flow to buy market dominance, turned market dominance into sovereign credit, and converted sovereign credit into political immortality. He didn't build wealth through prostitution, he used prostitution as a launchpad into systemic power. After the destruction of 1381, the Bankside stewhouses didn't vanish, they were rebuilt within months. The Bishop of Winchester rebuilt his timber frames, the stewards unrolled fresh parchment rolls, new Flemish operators took out leases, the 14-pence room caps were re-established. The church understood something fundamental about human nature and municipal finance. You cannot outlaw vice in a major trade hub. But if you quarantine it, license it, tax it, and fine it, you can transform a moral taboo into a perpetual revenue machine.